Welcome to the Same Side Selling Podcast. I am your host, Ian Altman. There's a new role in business that many of my clients have discovered recently. It's a role that is probably familiar to many of you, but you may not have thought of it this way. Sometimes when you're involved in a deal, there is someone who has the unofficial job title of Vice President of Business Prevention. In the first company I worked for out of college, before I started any of my businesses, the gentleman's name was Bob, and we referred to Bob as the Vice President of Business Prevention because if there was a deal on the table, Bob could certainly figure out a way to kill that deal. And in every business, we've figured out that there are people like that. And what I want to touch on here is this isn't someone to complain about, but instead we need to have a little bit of empathy. You need to think about what is it that's going through their head that causes them to be reluctant to take on these types of projects when it's internal. See, there are two different impediments. There's an internal vice president of business prevention, and there's an external vice president of business prevention who exists in your client's world. Now, first, let's talk about the internal one. The internal one usually is reluctant, not because they don't want to bring in new business, but more the way the deal is structured, the kinds of questions or issues the client is raising, the way the salesperson has proposed the deal causes some level of uncertainty on the part of that vice president of business prevention. That person could actually have an official title of VP of Sales. It could be a sales manager. It could be a CEO. It could be the CFO. It doesn't matter. What you need to realize is their goal, I assure you, is not how do I kill business for our organization, but instead their goal is how do I ensure that we don't take on undue risk. For example, you might tell somebody, oh, we need to price it this way to get this deal. And they're thinking, look, knucklehead, if we do it that way, we're going to lose money. And we're not going to take on a deal that's a loser for us. It might be the project isn't well enough defined. And if it's not well enough defined, then guess what? Your organization is going to take on the risk and liability of that project that may or may not play out well. Now, when it comes to the external side of the world, and now we're dealing with the client, guess what? Oftentimes what we get is people who are resistant to change. So why are those people resistant to change? Well, probably for the same reasons that your internal VP of Business Prevention is reluctant to change, which is, well, we've bought into stuff from vendors before that sounded like this and didn't pan out. We have people on our team who have said they're going to accomplish this, but they really don't, and I don't want to repeat that mistake over and over again. So what we need to realize is that both of those individuals have very similar behavior characteristics. So their behavioral characteristics are the same, which is they've probably been burned before, they're reluctant to take on additional risk, and we look at it as, why is this person getting in the way? So how do we fix that? Because in this case, I've explained to you, there could be an internal VP of business prevention. There could be an external VP of business prevention. But how do we uncover the truth? How do we help them to see the world maybe the same way that we're seeing it? And there are a couple things we need to think about. One is that we may need to propose a different business model or structure. Maybe we're coming at it from the perspective of, maybe you're the seller and you think, I need to charge less. And your internal executive is saying, no, we can't afford to do that for less. That's not a good deal for us. Your client may be saying, well, you're charging me for all this stuff. I'm going to pay for these things. But generally their reluctance comes down to one of two things. They either don't believe in the impact of doing nothing, or they don't believe in the results that allegedly you're saying you can deliver for them, or that their internal team is saying they're going to realize from working together. So how do we overcome it? Well, in both situations, what we have to do is show a little bit of empathy. And we can use the same side quadrants as our guide to navigate through that process. See, the same side quadrants give us that structure. Remember, in the same side quadrant, we take notes in the upper left corner about the issue, in the upper right quadrant about the impact and relative importance, the lower left quadrant about results, and the lower right quadrant, we take notes about others impacted or others we need to include in the process. Guess what? Internally, it's the same thing, which is, so what is it you're concerned about on this deal? You might ask the executive who you see as your VP of Business Prevention. Or if you're that person, you might be asking, well, what am I concerned about? Here's what I'm concerned about. See, you want to take this on a fixed price basis, but there are too many unknowns. So the answer might be, well, let's come up with smaller individual pieces that are fixed price. Let's come up with discrete deliverables so that we get rid of some of the risk. From the external side, when you're dealing with the customer, it's really going to get back to the quadrants that says, look, my sense is that maybe you've tried this in the past and it hasn't gone well. What are the things that might prevent you from getting the results that you need, even if we do everything we said we would do? And oftentimes your client will suggest things that are gaps in their own business that might create opportunities for you to suggest new areas that you can help them that might expand the scope of your opportunity. But instead, what usually happens is people just get frustrated. So sellers say, well, this person's just getting in the way. They don't want to do this. Well, I can assure you that if the client really has a problem that's costing them money, everyone in that organization probably would like to solve it. It's just they may not believe that you can actually deliver the results. And sometimes they believe that you have the capabilities, but their internal people can't get it done, and they have little faith in their ability to execute. So what that means is that both internally and externally, we need to have these very serious and real conversations, these honest conversations that say, what are we concerned about? And how do we figure out if this is worth pursuing or not worth pursuing? So internally, I might say, well, where do you see the risk? Okay, here's where we could lose money. How could we structure this in a way that would make you more confident this is going to work out well? When it comes to externally, it's the same question, really, which is, obviously, there's a valid concern that you have. Help me understand it. I might agree with you that we can't overcome that. Or if it looks like we can, you and I will lay out a plan together. And if we're both bought into it, we'll set some milestones to make sure that together we're going to reach that outcome. See, the vice president of business prevention for your customer is usually actually the easier sale, because once they realize that you are more interested in the outcome or result than the sale, it builds a level of trust. It also means that if they share something that you honestly can't overcome, that you need to be transparent with them and say, I'm not sure if we can do that. Most of the work I do is in the business to business side of the world. I was speaking with someone recently who said, well, we do some of this work on the consumer side. How would this apply to us? And I said, I don't know that it would. We're going to have to figure that out together, because even though I've got clients who are on the consumer side and have had some pretty good results, I know how this works on the business to business side, but I'm a little bit less sure about how things work on the consumer side. So we'd have to pilot that in a small area to make sure you get the results and then magnify it from there. In fact, I used to not do work with people in financial services. We realized the way high net worth individuals make decisions happens to be very similar to how business people make decisions. So the quadrants and all the things I teach align really well in that space. But initially I was uncertain. So I took on a couple clients in that area on a very limited basis. We made sure we saw results. And now it's an area that I feel comfortable serving. The same thing holds true for your business. What that means is, if you are focused on the results with your client, and if you see a red flag to those results being achieved, you need to be the one who brings it up. Don't be on defense, be on offense and say, here's what I'm concerned about. How about you? That level of transparency will build trust with your client and will make it so that the VP of business prevention, both internally and externally, might be somebody who instead becomes your advocate and says, how do we get this deal done with them? Because they're confident that you're as committed to the results as they are. If there are topics you'd like to see on the Same Side Selling podcast, just drop me a note to Ian@ianaltman.com. Have a great week.